Sky howdy. Welcome to another episode of World Bigfoot Radio. We have a special all Rocky Mountain Alpine episode coming to you this week because I'm in the Rockies and so is my guest. And we both research Bigfoot in the Rockies. This is someone that you folks have not heard of before. But before we get to the guest, and I'm pretty excited to bring him on here, let me mention that the website is now up. If you want to go check it out, worldbigfootcentral.com. And this show is entirely viewer funded, so if you would like to help out in that regard, paypal.me/worldbigfootcentral. And also, we do have a support partner now, which I've mentioned before, and I'm going to mention them again because I'm using their services. I really like it. They're really good. And everybody needs security. So when you're ready to have people quit spying on you and have security, and you want your own VPN, go to ProXPN, PROXPN. And use the coupon code SAVE1975, that's SAVE1975, to get yourself a whopping gigantic 50% off. Totally worth it. Awesome. So anyway, with that, let's get back to the show and welcome on my guest. And his nickname is Matt, which he'll explain why. And welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm happy that it's warm today. We're actually getting temperatures in the 30s here. It's supposed to be in the 40s next week. And believe it or not, we're planning on doing a trip up to Coloma tomorrow and see if we can find any mountain giant tracks.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's scary.
60 degrees here the last couple of days. It's been really nice.
Yeah, we're lucking out. We're getting the nice weather here in the Rockies this year. Everybody else gets to freeze to death, apparently. I have a friend, Kevin from the Glag Saga, who lives further south down in Missouri. And I'm surprised at how often I talk to him that the weather down there is colder than it is up here. I'm like, my God, why are you living there? Summers are hotter, winters are colder. It doesn't sound appealing.
That's ironic. Definitely.
Yeah, and he's from, right next door to here, Idaho, so he's used to the same kind of weather that we get. Oh, yeah, but he likes chasing Momo around down there in Missouri, so he's having fun while he's there. Well, hey, introduce yourself to everyone. Let us know a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into talking about your incredibly awesome documentary that you're releasing.
Well, very well. My name's Matthew or Mateo. I grew up in South America. My father's Ecuadorian, my mother's from Colorado, so I was kind of got a little bit of both worlds. I went into the Marine Corps where I was in infantry and intelligence, and then later did disaster relief and became a survival expert. And I've actually lived up in the mountains for months at a time. So
that lends itself to making you uniquely qualified amongst most Bigfoot researchers to be somebody that can actually get out there and rough it and be right there where Bigfoot is for long periods of time and not have any problems doing it.
Well, yes, and that's also what made it harder was because when I started becoming a survival expert and going up and living there for months at a time, I had 2 encounters that, traumatized me for a while because it's not every day you realize that some unknown apex predator that shouldn't exist is so close to home and in the woods in your backyard.
So this was happening to you while you were getting all your wilderness. So you weren't a kid or anything. You were already an adult and had your perception of what was real and what wasn't. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, what the hell are these things?
Well, I mean, it was a long time forming. So when I was in high school, I had my first. I ran into strange stuff that I just dismissed, and it wasn't until I had the encounters that I put everything together and realized that they had been around this entire time. However, when I'd go make these shelters up high in the mountains, they weren't really shelters; they were more like forts. Because always in the back of my mind, I knew that they existed, and they freaked me out. I preferred not to know they existed, and I don't blame people for trying to deny it. It's scary. You want to feel safe. You want to be the top of the food chain and be able to protect yourself from whatever dangers that might be out there. And we can do that pretty well with the known animals. But once you have to add in an unknown factor in the mix, that's a terrifying feeling. And, maybe it's my training. being in the Marine Corps and going to 2 combat deployments. But I felt really vulnerable realizing that there was an unknown factor, a wild card out there that I had no idea what it could do, its capabilities.
So as I come here, I've been doing little whoops similar to the one that was filmed in Utah, where it sounded like a baby one. And I'm hoping I got some responses. I sound like a rock being thrown, and or a gunshot, but I think it was a rock, or else I would have heard more. So I was moving as it was happening. On top of that, as I was like moving around, I stopped and I heard something else moving really close to me, just to like the other side of the canyon, like right behind me up by the rocks, just like the last time when I heard it. So yeah, and then I'm not sure if it's just something that broke, but a stick just fell behind me, like just a little one, and it might have just been hanging on me as I was walking through the brush. But definitely the walking and the rock throwing I heard. So hopefully I'm not aggravating them, because I am in a small little canyon with no way to escape if they decide to ambush me, or any animal for that matter. Yeah, something's walking. They're okay when I'm walking or talking loudly. They feel safe to move. So when I'm talking loudly or making noises or moving, then I start hearing them, because they're still big, they're still massive, and so they make noise even as they're creeping along. They're not like omnipotently silent, but they are super silent for their size. So I'm fairly certain they're around here. Haven't gone to the trail cam yet, but we'll see if this experiment works. Oh. So I'm going to try to be genuine, not be super afraid and on the defensive side, so that they feel less threatened by me. But make no mistake, I am armed if it comes to that. But hopefully it doesn't.
And I'm not the only one. I have a friend who owns a survival school further up in the mountains, and when I bring up, like the topic of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, he'd always laugh it off and make jokes. And then I asked him, like, what do you think? And then as a kid, he actually found huge tracks and a whole trackway in the snow that he couldn't explain, that they had to jump from one track to the other. And he showed me the area where it is on a map. And sure enough, it's right next to a mountain in the middle of nowhere called Booger Red Hill.
Oh, God.
Right. So,
no warning there whatsoever. Yeah, let's give him a hint. We'll call it Sasquatch Ridge,
Right?
Oh, my God.
And so a lot of people make jokes about it because they don't want to admit that such an animal exists, especially people that go out there. I don't blame them, right? Like I said, like I was always very aggressive, heavily armed when I went up there for my survival shelters and just living up there, because I did not want to have any interactions with these hominid species, because I didn't want to think that they existed, even though I already had experiences that I knew they did.
I know what you're saying, brother, because I've had 3 Class A sightings now, and there's some days that I like to try and convince myself that they didn't happen and I imagined them. And it doesn't work very effectively, especially when I start looking at pictures of all the other stuff that I found. No. I can't convince myself of that anymore. But my point is here, even after 40 years plus of knowing that they're real, and knowing as in having seen one, it's still it's really hard to deal with. You still don't want to really believe it. It's, you still try and convince yourself occasionally that, no, I'm just just imagining all of this. It's not real because it's so inconvenient. Because I'll tell you the other thing that a lot of people don't bring up. Yes, you see a Bigfoot or something and it shakes up your whole world. It switches your whole paradigm. It flips everything upside down. Oh my God, there really is some kind of big monster thing running around the woods. But here's the point most people don't think about. You extrapolate one step beyond that. Okay, if Bigfoot's real, what else is real?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it forces you to ask that question. What else out there that's supposed to just be a legend, a myth, is real? And that's a scary prospect to have to question, to have to, look at. So I understand. So I live now in Colorado Springs, Colorado, right on the edge of the foothills. And for a long time, I felt... I looked into like Bigfoot and Sasquatch and these hominid creatures, and it was more entertaining, to think where they might be, like if they did exist, and to speculate. And I assumed that they would be far out into the mountains, trying to avoid people.
So before you had any actual like experiences that you can attribute to Bigfoot, you already sort of knew that there was such a thing, and you thought maybe it could be real.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, working a lot of intelligence, we use human intelligence, and that's basically word of mouth, where you talk to people and collect a lot of data, a lot of testimonies, and with that, you use that to get actual actionable intelligence, information that you can actually take action with. And when I went to the military, I thought that would be like the worst type of intelligence, the most unreliable, but surprise, surprise, it's actually one of the most accurate once you get enough information and enough people saying it. So the realization that there's so many testimonies that talk about the same thing really pushed the idea that the probability of the species like this existing into the realm of reality. But just the realm of thinking it's real is much different than knowing it's real. Because when you know it's real, then you have to actually put yourself in this new world, in this new place that's now totally foreign that you used to think was normal and safe. And that's kind of like what happened to me.
Yeah, that's a rough one, brother. I know in some ways I'm really grateful that I had my first sighting when I was 10 years old, because I didn't have to become an adult and then have the whole house of cards collapsed on me. I was still in the formative years where I could go, oh, there are monsters. The adults are lying. What else are they lying about? I'm going to not believe anything they say and check sources on everything from here on out. And that's what turns you into a conspiracy theorist. The
humble beginnings.
The humble beginnings of conspiracy theorists. Yep, there you go. But I mean, it's just basic logic. Look, they're saying this isn't real. There's one standing right there. Looks real to me. What else are they lying about?
Well, so the realization after, I started really looking into it more after my encounters was that they had been around this area all the time. Now, I used to work at this tourist attraction called Seven Falls, which is a really nice canyon on the edge of like the foothills, and it's a tourist attraction that you go outside and watch these waterfalls. One year in high school, and this is probably like the very beginning of where I started noticing things where I could connect them together. We got these reports at midday that by the entrance of the canyon that we were working at, that there were 3 dead deer along the side of the road. And we thought that's weird. It's private property. Why are they there? So I was working at maintenance at the time, and I went down with the maintenance manager, which I'll tell you something about him in a moment. So we go down there, and there's like these 3 like juvenile but almost adult deer stretched like probably 6 meters from each other on the side of the road, and they're all dead. There's no like teeth marks. There's no like bullet wounds, knife marks, anything. But their stomachs have been ripped open, and it looks like some organ's been taken out, and it looks like their necks have been broken. Right. And well, I mean, where do you place that? Where do you put that? And so I asked like the manager, and I was like, what do you think did this? And he just said Satanist, which, is what we'll do here. We'll just throw it off on Satanist and the occult. because the modern day occult started in a place called Manitou Springs, right next to Colorado Springs, and there's been a lot of occult activity for decades here. So everyone attributes anything weird to the occult, which we just call Satanist. So that's what he threw it as. But looking back on it, and using like the skill sets I have now, I realized like I felt like he looked at it like he knew what it was, but said it was something else. And what he was always saying was in the canyon was in the middle of the night, he'd always have to go up in the middle of the canyon because something was always tripping the sensors, because they had security sensors throughout the whole entire canyon. And he was always like, it was probably just bear. But he'd always bring that up. And I wonder if the two are connected and if he somehow was having encounters with these creatures there.
Certainly possible. That's one of the things that you run into around this area, too, where it's like you have these little towns where pretty much everybody's either seen a Bigfoot or one of their relatives or friends has seen one, or they sort of, like virtually, condescendingly admit that it exists, even if they're on the far side of the skeptic spectrum. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that they'll talk to any outsiders about it, or that they ever file a sighting report to the BFRO or anything like that. As I brought up, and I'm sure you mentioned it before too, that it takes two things to make a Bigfoot sighting. You got to have a Bigfoot, and you have to have a witness. So some of these areas that are gigantic wilderness, probably tons of Bigfoot in them, but nobody goes there, so nobody sees them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Or a lot of people go there and they don't.
They stay on the trails.
Well, they either don't talk about it, or the Bigfoot of the area know how to get around people. And there's a reason areas like the canyon that I'm at is considered haunted. It's been considered haunted for centuries. And I suspect now it's because these hominid species have been living there for who knows how long. There's a reference, I haven't been able to find a source for it, of that the Utes, the natives of this area, the area where this is at, these canyons, is that they used to use to go from like the South Park area over to the plains on the south side of Pikes Peak, and they call it the war path, because the other path is U Pass, which is the path that the highway and everything goes through now. And they said they'd only use the war path because it was shorter, but they'd only use it in times of war and emergency, was because that's where the giant hairy people lived. Now, I haven't been able to find a source on this, but I have found evidence to support it, because Governor Anza, when he was coming up to fight the Comanche, he in Conejos County in the San Luis Valley, he met up with a group of 200 Utes, and the translations say that's the route he took, was south of Pikes Peak. So that does support this, that route was the warpath. So it is interesting that it sounds like there possibly could be native history to the area as well.
Yeah, it also sounds like, to put it in Star Trek terms, you've got like the Romulan neutral zone there, only it's got Bigfoot instead of Romulans.
Right.
You don't go through this area unless you have to, because the guys that are in control of it aren't that friendly.
Yeah. And so the next thing that happened was a couple of years later, and I used to go on night hikes all the time when I was in high school. So I'd go for hours just walking into the forest, and I wouldn't have like a flashlight or anything, and I enjoyed it. I liked kind of being like scared and exploring. In retrospect, I realized I may have come across these hominids many times, which freak me out. Like, it scares me when I think about how many times I went out there in the same area where I'm getting contact now, and how many times I may have come across them. But at the same time, that's reassuring, because that means at any time when I was younger, they could have hurt me, and they didn't. So a year after high school, or right after high school, my friends found out that I like to go on night hikes, so they wanted to come with me. So we went up west and north of Woodland Park, and just stopped on the highway and went straight up into National Forest. And so we started heading up, and I had this giant spotlight at the time, and they had it, and I like to get to the destination, right? Like, that's like normally my mentality is get to the destination. So they were just trying to scare themselves and going really slow, and I was kind of annoyed. We had probably made a foot and a half of snow, and I wanted them to go faster, and they were being really loud and obnoxious. So I took my spotlight and I just headed straight up the hill. And they just went slower now without the spotlight and kept making noise. And so eventually I kept going up, and I call it a hill, but it's probably like 1,500 foot hill. So it's, it depends where you are.
Yeah. To us, that's a hill. To some people, it's a mountain.
But it's definitely still a climb, right? Yeah. And so eventually I can't hear them anymore, and I keep going, and I have my flashlight off the whole time, and I'm almost to the top of this large hill. And then all of a sudden I hear this, it was like the loudest scream / screech, and it sounded like the mix between a woman dying and an animal, almost like dual vocal cords, at the same time. You had like a low pitch, like almost like like some bizarre creature screaming, and then a high pitch of a woman. And it let out this huge scream, and I just stood frozen there, like with this fear. But it was almost like subconscious, like as consciously I could remember thinking, why? I know it's like a freaky scream, but why am I like frozen? And I think it's instinct. Like my instincts took in, because I don't think most people have ever been in a situation where they're not on the top of the food chain, where their life may be in danger, and one of our instincts is fight or flight, or just freeze, just like the animals do. And I think that's what happened. Like somewhere in the deep recesses of my subconscious and instinct, they kicked in and they just said freeze, and they just took full control of my body, and I was just frozen there, just wondering like, why is it so ingrained where I'm just frozen? I was frozen, like I couldn't move. I just couldn't move, but I was aware of everything going on. It was really interesting. And I felt like 5 minutes, but it probably was a lot longer of time. But my friends eventually showed up behind me, and they were like, well, why are you stopped? And I asked them if they'd heard the scream, and they hadn't. So that meant that they were probably really far away, still being loud, which probably meant a lot more time had passed than 5 minutes. And they think I'm trying to scare them at this point, and they start just thinking I'm joking around, but then they realize like I'm serious, because they've never seen me actually freaked out, and they realize that I wasn't kidding, and I'm the one person out of the whole group that's willing to go into the dark, willing to go to the places that scare everybody else. So the fact that I'm kind of freaked out freaks them out even more, and they want to turn back. And by this point, I'd gained my composure, and I decided that I wanted to keep pressing on. And reluctantly, they came with me because they didn't want to be alone after seeing me in that state and hearing my story. And so we get to the top, and there were some tracks. The snow was deeper up on top, and I obviously I didn't know what I was looking for. I just saw like some big tracks, and I just let it go. And on the way back down, I took a different route, and I found bear tracks, which now in retrospect probably wasn't a bear track, because it's the middle of winter. I mean, granted, bears will not, like, sometimes they'll wake up in the middle of winter and go rummage around, but the likelihood's really slim. So I wonder if those tracks were something else. But that's the first time like I had a weird experience where I was aware. But that was like in the early 2000s. So when I got back and researched online, that was back then associated with haunted forests, screams in the forest, and not necessarily with like a North American hominid.
Right. It's funny how often I hear stuff like that from especially the eastern and southern parts of the U.S. where people have been there a lot longer. So there's a lot more old abandoned farmsteads and, barns and that kind of stuff. Just some of them out in the middle of nowhere. People, there's not even a road to them anymore. They're just sitting there collapsing. And a lot of these you'll hear that, we don't go out there because this, the old abandoned barn is haunted or this old farm is haunted. Well, how do you know it's haunted? Well, weird things happen when you're there, and you hear like weird screams and howls and stuff. That's probably not a ghost.
But that's what it was associated with in the past.
Yeah.
Down in South America, after the Marine Corps, went down there, started a business, and that's when I started really just doing research on Bigfoot, because what happened is my business, it was my first business. It wasn't successful. I had a lot of problems. Like someone came and stole all my stuff from the house I was living at.
Oh, God.
So I needed something to do. And one of the things that I questioned was, well, why do we have all these reports up in North America but not South America? A hominid that was so successful to claim all of North America should be able to, come all the way down here. And I was with my family, and we went out to go see like this place along the route from the Andes to the ocean in the foothills there, that they made these huge pools. Like they built all these big stone pools, and the Incas came and they took it from this tribe that built them and just created them for their own, like almost like a pleasure palace. So anyway, we go into the museum that they have. They have like a little museum visitor center. And there's a mannequin in there on display in a ghillie suit. And I asked, what was that? And they told me that this was this legend the locals have, that there's a hairy, man beast, like wild man, that comes at night and steals women and children. So
sounds familiar.
Yeah. And so then I started looking into it, and I had to look it up in Spanish. Luckily, I know Spanish, so that helped. And I started looking for reports in Spanish, and instead of trying to look for, like wild man or Bigfoot, I started looking for descriptions and behaviors. And when I did it like this, I got a lot of hits, and a lot of these same like descriptions and behaviors were attributed to demons and witches, which there is very heavily Catholicism. So a lot of strange stuff is going to be attributed to demons and witches and other stuff, things that are demonic or evil in the Catholic, religion. Right. So that was interesting. So there's tons of stories down there as well.
Very interesting. Do they have an actual local name for the Bigfoot type critters that live down there?
They're all different. I don't have it on hand right now, but I could find it, the actual names. But I know places like Argentina and like the Patagonia area, they're starting to become more mainstream, call them Bigfoot, and you can find them.
Why not? They got probably the same thing down there that we have up here, or at least a version of it. As far as I know, like Central America, they've got Mondo Grande, and northern South America's Mapinguari, and there's one other one that I know of. I can't think of what the name is right off the top of my head. But again, there are reports of these Bigfoot-like critters in South America and Central America too. So, no surprise. It was a real critter. You would expect that they would be there too.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like whatever this species or multiple species are, they're very adaptable, and they can adapt really well to different climates and areas. The next thing that's happened along my way was, I continued working at that same spot called Seven Falls, which is now owned by the Broadmoor. It used to be private, but my friends, they would go to this parking lot a lot next to this school, and the area is called Stratton Open Spaces, and it's known for orbs. However, on this one particular night, they went there and they were just hanging out in their vehicle when they saw like these, they say, illuminating red eyes looking at them from the brush, and it would keep peeking back and forth, and the more they looked at it and realized it was something real, the more they freaked out and they just took off out of there. And then of course another friend years later, she used to go night hikes into the same area, and one night she says she was walking on the trail and she looks up the hill, and 30 feet away is this huge tall creature with, she says, like illuminated red eyes staring at her. Like she freaked out so much, she like kind of squatted in the fetal position and put her head down, closed her eyes for a couple minutes. Then when she looked up, it was gone. So other strange stuff and phenomena has been happening there. And of course, the whole area is considered haunted. And people they say it's ghosts, but they hear like weird noises. They get weird stuff thrown at them. They see weird shadows in the woods, stuff like that. So it started coming together.
That's hilarious. You could almost draw a cartoon of Bigfoot starting a legend about an area being haunted so humans don't go in there and bother them.
Well, and here's the interesting thing is, because most of the people that go up there are teenagers, that they go up because it's like a mountain road right on the fringes of the city. So it's the place where they can escape from authoritarianism and their parents. And they go drink and go do dumb stuff. There's a lot of people that don't believe them when they have like these weird encounters and stories up there. Because they're like, you were drunk, you're just young and stupid. And so a lot of stuff happened up there, but it's dismissed.
Yeah, I can see that happening. I mean, when I was a kid, we used to have big gravel pit parties because we had lots of old abandoned gravel pits near where I lived. So we could all drive our vehicles out there and bring a few kegs out to the old abandoned gravel pit and have parties and that. And, I never heard of any firsthand, but I would be really surprised if there weren't encounters during some of these things and people just never bothered to talk about it because it was, like, who's going to believe you're a drunken teenager?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the things, people experienced they had when people were young, they just dismissed it, like I did, like the deer, the howl, or the scream, I guess you would call it. I just dismissed it. It was back in the day, I have other things to worry about, focus on. It just faded away from memory.
So before we get too far off the topic here, since you brought up lovely South America and Ecuador in particular, what sort of reputation does the Bigfoot-type critter down there have? Is it about the same as ours? Is it like more aggressive or less aggressive, or does it have any different behaviors?
Well, the one thing that struck me was that it's shorter. It's around 6 feet in height. But it's still, hairy and still has an inclination to be nocturnal and, of course, try to kidnap women and children. And I didn't look that far into it, but I did get a bunch of names and of different local creatures in South America. And I have it in a PowerPoint that I can find, and I can actually forward it to you. But that's about it as far as the behaviors and the traits.
I'm sort of sad that, I'm glad that some of those countries down there are starting to get an awareness and interest in it, but it's like, there's probably tons of really interesting encounters that we're not hearing about just because it's like not a thing there, and there's other parts of the world too where it's, certain countries, they're like finding Bigfoot. What's that? They really don't have any awareness of it, even though they might have Bigfoot in their damn country. The Scandinavian countries, they tend to not believe in that sort of thing. They've got old folk legends about little people, and there's a lot more people that are willing to think that there are little people or even have clubs where they talk about it and stuff. But it's like virtually an unknown thing to think like Bigfoot could be running around in Scandinavia. And yet I know of at least 4 field researchers between Norway and Sweden, and they're all finding the same evidence we're finding over here.
Yeah, that's very intriguing. When more is known, it's going to change our whole way that we perceive the world, our evolution, migrations, and just everything. I think it's going to reawaken the age of discovery once again.
Yeah, we sort of need a kick in our complacency too anyway, because, we think, well, we know everything that's going on in the world. Well, somebody might know everything that's going on in the world, but they sure as hell aren't telling us about it. They're giving us a big pack of hooey to believe. We're living the life of a mushroom. They're keeping us in the dark and feeding us a load of bleep. That's basically it.
Well, it's one of the properties of power and control. Yeah. Divide and conquer.
Yeah, like the golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes all the rules.
Yeah.
So at what point did you decide that you really needed to get out there and actively research this? After was that it for your other previous experiences before you got into researching, or did you have anything else?
Well, no, I had a few other
Well, let us know about them first, then.
Okay. Well, so the first encounter where I could no longer question or dismiss or ignore.
Plausible deniability.
Yeah, happened. I had just come back from Ecuador in 2012, and I became a manager again at Seven Falls. A lot of stuff happened there. I used to go there. I had a lot of time in the same area. And I was dating a chick at that time, and we would always meet outside of Seven Falls in these picnic tables, just right between Seven Falls and the city. And then you have like these open spaces with trees and creeks and that connect eventually up to National Forest. So we're really close to the city, right? It's a place where I had been, I'd grown up. I'd been there probably thousands of times, because just an innumerable amount of times. And I'd been at the same exact picnic area every night, probably for like the last year. Except on this night, it was a little bit different. So this night, I went there, and we started hearing across the street in the dense brush something moving, 3 distinct large masses moving. And at first it sounded like deer moving through the brush, and they'll make noise as they graze and pass through. And we have a huge overpopulation of deer, mule deer, here in Colorado Springs. So I just assumed they were deer, right?
Yeah, because we have so many of them wandering around. That's the likeliest candidate.
Yeah, and there's a deer trail of maybe about 25 feet or 30 feet or more that parallel the road. And so I just assume it's deer. I tell my girlfriend at the time, don't worry about it, it's just deer. Except we keep hearing it. And it's been like an hour and a half by this point, and they're still like just kind of across the other side of the road. And it's like they're making a little bit of noise, like enough for me to hear them, as if they're just walking around, not being loud, but enough to go as they're stepping on leaves and going through the brush. But they're staying in the same area. And deer don't stay in the same area. They normally graze and move. And so It's been like an hour and a half. It's been a long time, right? And it's nice. It's summertime. We're just out on the picnic table. And so I start to get curious. Yeah, and I want to know what's going on. What is that? What's making that noise? And obviously I wasn't prepared at all at that time. And all I had was the little light on my phone. I had like an older iPhone. And I decided I'm going to go investigate. And she doesn't want me to leave, and it's not very far, right? It's across the road, a little further down. Obviously we can hear them. They're close enough where we can hear something in the brush. Now I go over there, and I walk over to where I hear it, like something moving in the brush, and it just stops. And of course my light can barely penetrate maybe 10 feet into this dense brush.
Oh, no.
But the other two are making noise, right? And so I walk to the second one, and it stops. And then I hear a pebble. I hear something hit behind me. So I look behind me, and a pebble has landed on the ground right behind me. And I look up, and I see my girlfriend going into the back of her vehicle, and I think, okay, maybe she was upset and she threw that at me. Except it's way too far for her to, have thrown. But I'm just telling myself that's probably what happened, right? I'm trying to figure out like a way that makes sense to me. So I go over to the last one, and then it stops making noise as soon as I get right in front of it on the road. And so I just give up, and I start walking back, and then I see this pebble come out of the brush and land right in front of me.
Uh-oh.
And by this point, I'm thinking, okay, what is that? What is that? I'm like, well, deer don't throw pebbles.
No. It's one of those darn boulder grizzlies.
Right, those little pebble throwing grizzlies. And
yeah, those damn boulder grizzlies.
I don't remember if at that point I started thinking, could this be, something like a Sasquatch? But I remember thinking, this is really unusual. And it just didn't make sense in my mind. Would a person be here for an hour and a half, trying to mess with us? Imagine trying to pull a prank on someone and just walking around quietly for over an hour, trying to get their attention. They just didn't add up. So I go over to my girlfriend, and I ask her just to, I want to be sure. And I was like, did you throw a pebble at me? And obviously she thinks I'm trying to scare her now. And I'm just like, she's like, no, of course not. And I was like, I didn't think so, but I had to ask,
Man.
So we're waiting there, and I can still hear them. And I just had these pebbles thrown at me, and I'm intrigued. I'm not scared yet, but I'm intrigued. And so I finally make up my mind. I'm going to go in there and see what's making that noise. And I know the area really well. I've gone hiking, I've gone exploring. I normally don't take trails. I just run off trail, That's just what I like to do. And I know there's a deer path right that skirts the road where it sounds like where they're at. So I take a human trail, and mind you, my girlfriend at the time came with me because she didn't want to be alone. So we go up, and then we go into the brush on this deer trail. And so we get kind of in the proximity where I heard the noises, and my light still can't see anything, which in retrospect, I'm glad. From what I know now.
Yeah.
But so we're just there, and then we hear some vehicles pull up nearby. And this is going to be the irony is I used to like to scare people over there because I can make, like, we have like these dual vocal cords. If you know how to use them, you can make all like 2 pitches at once. And so I'd make this weird, scary howl, and I would scare like people like getting stoned or drunk at these picnic sites. I would just do these howls and come closer and closer. Like this one time, this group, like I don't know, it was like 3 vehicles and a bunch of like guys. They were out there, like they could tell they were drunk, and so I made this strange howl, and then I got closer and closer, and that you could hear them. At first, they were like howling back because they thought it was funny, and then when I got closer and closer, you could hear them being like, no more, oh man, what is that? You know, freaking out. And then one dude let out the howl, and they're like, what are you doing? Like got really close and did it, and they all just went into their vehicles, slammed the doors, and drove off. Well, the joke's on me, okay? In the end, which in retrospect is probably what brought them in and got them curious about.
Yeah, this is a classic boy that cried wolf, substitute Sasquatch for that wolf.
So we hear them. So I forget all about what's going on, right? The rock pebble throwing. I should have been more aware, but obviously I was complacent. Complacency kills, as we taught in the Marine Corps. But so I start making this noise, and granted, right? Like we've forgotten the whole incident that occurred, and so it's like they didn't even exist. And so I'm making a strange howl and trying to freak these people nearby out at another picnic table. And, we do that for a little bit, and then we come back to the vehicle. I totally forgot about like the whole incident. But then as soon as we get back to the vehicle, that's when all hell breaks loose. And oh my gosh, I've never been so afraid. Okay, maybe like when I'm getting shot at, I've been afraid. But the fear is, I feel like, tenfold when it's something that's unknown.
Exactly.
So these huge like brush trees, like we have like brush oak here, scrub oak, it starts shaking. Like it just starts shaking fiercely from like around the area we just came from. And then these big rocks and huge sticks start getting flung at us, and it sounds like something's rushing us. It's it's coming up to us, except by the sound it's making, like it's stomping up as if like it's running at us. It doesn't get to us in that time, so it's like a bluff charge. So it sounds like it's rushing us, but it's not. But it doesn't matter. Like I'm freaking out, Something huge was shaking. These big trees is coming at us and throwing big sticks and rocks at us. And so I grab her and I bring her to her vehicle and I say, get out of here. And I get in mine and I get out, and it's still shaking, and like there's no sounds, there's no like growls or anything, not that I can hear, but it's violence, and it's shaking like these huge trees that there's no way I can do. And so by this point, like it's clicked, and I'm like, okay, maybe that's a Sasquatch, and maybe that's these creatures. And so do you think
it was a review? Do you think he was giving you a review of your performance as a Sasquatch, trying to scare the people away? And like maybe he didn't appreciate that very much?
He was disappointed in my performance.
Yeah. Well,
in retrospect, what I realized what I did, knowing what I know now, is what I did is I cut off their egress route, because I went right around. Right in the area where so the only thing they have is forward on the road where they're going to be exposed. And then I let out these huge howls right next to them. Like they probably didn't know any better. For all they knew, I was like threatening them. And so when I came back and they had their egress route opened again, then they felt comfortable enough to do a display of like intimidation, and it worked. It worked. It freaked me out. And so I went over.
Just before we go on here, it makes me wonder if maybe they didn't see you and they heard those calls and were wondering if you were some other kind of weird critter that they didn't know what it was and they needed to make a display to make you go away.
Maybe. Well, so the howls actually have, I'm going to say, screwed me twice. I'll explain that story here shortly. But so we went and met at the gas station, and before anything I had her just recount the whole thing back to me, just so I was trying to make sure I wasn't crazy. And sure enough, she recounted it pretty much the way I experienced it. And we called it a night, but we came back the next day because I was curious. I mean, I was freaked out, but I was curious. And sure enough, when we got there, and I have these pictures, I'll send them to you. They're not that great, but I found these huge impressions in like on the ground, and it was hard to mimic them because there was a lot of overgrowth and leaves on them, which I thought would be easy to make an impression, but it's like a sponge. I even jumped like on the sides at the angle, and I couldn't make an impression the way these were. One was 16 inches. The other one I think was 18 inches. I have it all on the pictures, so you'll be able to see it there. But there were these huge impressions right there in the areas where we heard them. And then the spot where something was charging us, throwing sticks, you could see where it walked down this like embankment getting towards the road. And you could see all like the broken limbs and stuff. And then in this area, because obviously at this point I'm trying to disprove it in my mind. I'm just like, well, maybe it was just a bear, even though after you see these impressions, there was no bear. But then I saw this area where the two prints went in one direction, and there was a stick about probably waist high, and I thought, well, obviously it was a bear then, because this huge stick still in front of it. If it was something walking on two legs, would have broken it. So I grabbed this stick, and it's been snapped, but it's been pulled back. So from the tracks where I was going, it was pulled back and snapped. It just moved back into place. And so it had been broken. So I was like, well, okay, well, I guess I can't dismiss this. And then later that night, I went back, and I brought my girlfriend at the time, and I put up chem lights. I had her try to look for me with like the flashlight, and I was in maybe 15 feet, and she couldn't see me at all. So there's no wonder why I couldn't see whatever was in there, even though we went in there with the small cell phone flashlights.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I actually set up my tent and camped in an area that they were using for a blind at one point, and I had a nice little S-shaped entrance into this little clearing in the middle of it, pine picket. Anybody wants to go back and look at the old Patty Canyon videos, they can see what it looked like and everything. But it was so dark in there, and a bright day at high noon, you still couldn't see into it. If you were sitting in it, you could see 360 degrees out of it just fine. But if you were outside of it looking in, and it didn't matter if it was like dawn, dusk, or noon, you couldn't see more than like 3 feet into this thing. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's in the dense brush over there still like that, where you can see out of it, but there's no way they can see you. So the next incident, so this had already, frightened me because it made me think, I wasn't safe in places where I felt safe, and it changed my whole assumption that if these creatures did exist, they would be far away from civilization, and this was the total opposite. So that whole facade of feeling safe, right on the foothills close to the city, was just gone in an instant. But
don't forget the original wave of Bigfoot researchers back there in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s are the ones that started that. It was the whole romance of the Bigfoot legend, far away in the wilderness, far away from where humans are. You've got to travel for a week to even get near where Bigfoot lives. And now Bigfoot's like right next to us, watching us all the time.
It was a rude awakening.
Yeah, it's a lot scarier. Even, Bigfoot exists, that's one thing, but it's a lot more comfortable to think that Bigfoot exists a long ways away from you.
Yes.
Like right next to where you're at.
Yeah. Oh, man, absolutely. So the next encounter that sealed the deal, and basically after this one, I didn't go out at night, and if I did, I was heavily armed, or so I wouldn't be hiking at night anymore after this one, is on the Rampart Range further north from where I was before. There's this area called Glen Erie that's right next to the Flying W Ranch. It's all like private land, like big areas, but it's all like, where a lot of people come in and visitors during the day. So it's not like it's one person's life. They're like businesses. And so we used to sneak in there. A friend and I, we would have like a night tag. And so my friends and I at this time we'd have like huge like manhunts in the middle of the night where we'd hunt each other. And we'd go miles and miles doing this, and we just run after each other. It was a lot of fun, kept you in really good shape. And what we learned early on was that in order to keep it going and more interesting, we would make howls so that we would keep the game going. Because if you hit in a really good spot and no one found you, the game would kind of get boring. So we would always make these howls at one another so that we know where each other were, to keep the game fun, to keep the game more action, the better. Well, this night was too much action. So I had gone there first to this area, and I climbed in and these areas have tons of acreage. And if you were to see it on a map, it's kind of in the border zone between the two properties. And it's the middle of the night, no one's out, and it's winter. And so I get there first, and I'm waiting for my friend, and he eventually comes in and lets me know that he's there. And so I start doing the howls, and he's a distance away. I'm going to say maybe something like 400 to 600 yards. Like, he's a good distance away on like another kind of valley over. There's like a road in the middle, and he's on the other side. Right. And so I start the howls, right? And I put myself in a really vulnerable position because I want to make it more challenging, because we've been doing this game for a long time. I want to have fun. So I give myself like really limited egress routes, and I give him the advantage because I want to challenge myself. And so I'm doing these howls, and he's doing them back. He gets closer and closer, and he's pretty close by now. And so his last howl sounds like it's really far away again. So I assume he's just trying to trick me. The way I try to trick him to howl more is I'll howl like quieter and at a different direction to make him think I'm further away. So he'll keep howling, so I can get a closer idea where he's at. So I think he's done this to me. And then shortly afterwards, I start hearing him like creeping up on me, up on this gravel bank. It's really steep, and it's all like gravel. And he's a pretty big dude, and he's been doing a pretty good job, but I can hear him going quick, quick, quick. and he's outflanking me, and we've been doing this a long enough time. And then we talk about afterwards the tactics and strategies that were used, that he's just outflanking me the way I expected him to do that. And so he keeps going, and he's getting closer and closer. I can hear him, and then he stops right above me. So I'm on this trail that dead ends, and he's just like right above me, and there's just a tree and brush in the way. And I've already been waiting for him because he was late, so I was kind of annoyed. And then he's just waiting there, and that's not like him, because he runs much faster than me, so he takes advantage of that. So if he sees me, he runs. He'll just like a go for the charge, but he's not doing it this time, and he's just right there waiting, like watching me. And I'm just like, so I say, "Hey, what? Come on, man! I know you're there. Come and get me." And as soon as I say this out loud, I hear his howl, and it's still out there in the distance.
Oh crap!
And right then, I just knew. It was this creature. It was this hominid creature. It was either this hominid creature or some person in special forces that knows how to outflank and how to outmaneuver. Walking on two legs.
Neither one of those options is reassuring.
Right. But I want to make sure. That's always been it's helped me, and it's also been like consequences, but I want to make sure. So I call him right then and there, and I'm like, "Bro, where are you?" And sure enough, he's still way over there. And I'm like, "Please get to me as fast as you can. Please hurry." And so I hang up the phone, and I have a headlamp, but I don't have any firearms, anything. I put myself in a vulnerable position. It has the key terrain. I'm I screwed myself because I thought it was my friend, and so there was supposed to be no risk in taking this vulnerable spot and letting him, or in this case it, have the high ground. So I'm trying to think of what do I do? Like, I don't want to stay there. Like, I feel really vulnerable. I feel really exposed, and I don't know what to do, because I know if I go down like the egress routes I had, they go further into the forest and on harder terrain for me.
Oh, no.
But then if I go down the trail, whatever it is, it can easily outflank me, just cut me off. It's so hard. I don't know what to do, so I just try to be as intimidating as possible, and I just start screaming and yelling and just run as fast as I can down the trail, just hoping for the best. Like, just I panicked, that was because I didn't know what to do. That was all I could think of doing. It was going down the path that at least I knew I would be able to go my fastest, and just try to be intimidating, and hopefully it would buy me some time if this thing meant to cause me harm. So sure enough, I do that. I run as fast as I can, and I'm hoping to run into my friend Tom, on the trail. Like, I figured, like, he would have come by now, but he's not. He's on the other side of this valley in a road in the middle, and I can see him, his shadow, like the figure over there, and I howl to try to get him to come. And I see him coming down the ravine, and then he goes back up again. I'm like, what is going on? So I turn my light and I flash at him, and he sees it, and he comes all the way over to me. And I'm pretty freaked out. I feel really vulnerable still, because there's still a bunch of brush around us. And I say, I don't feel comfortable talking here. So we run all the way up the trail, and this trail eventually takes you to a national forest, the scar that's up there. And the scar is like a hill that's been like mined off, I think, for gypsum for the Air Force Academy. But now it's a bighorn sheep sanctuary. But anyway, up there, like, you can see all around you. So I don't wait. I don't stop until we get all the way up there. And then I tell him my story, what happened to me. And he says, well, that's really interesting, because he felt that one of the howls that he heard he didn't think it was me, and it wasn't him. And then he said the reason it was taking him so long is because he kept seeing what he thought was a figure down in the ravine down below him, and he thought it was me, like, trying to trick him. And then when he was coming down the ravine after he heard my howl, he saw the outline of someone else down there. And so he thought again, like, I was tricking him. So he ran back up, and that's why he ran back up. And it was taking so long because he was seeing something down there.
Odd.
He thought it was me. And so I after that, I didn't
whatever it was, if assuming there was only one of them, it was still in between you and him.
Well, I don't think it was one. I think there were multiple ones. So
that would be my guess too.
Another one to go see him, and obviously he just shrugged it off. And like, he still stays like a skeptic, even though he's the one that like heard like the howl that he was pretty sure wasn't me, it wasn't him, and saw twice some figure, what he thought was a figure of a person walking like trying to hide from him in the brush at the bottom of the ravine. So,
whoa. Well, yeah, what do you think in a situation like that? It's the middle of the night and you're out in the woods. There's not supposed to be other humans out there wandering around.
Yeah. Well, and, we've been doing this for years, and we were really good at it, spotting people, tactics, strategy. We even used to use Nerf guns and hunt each other, that way. And it's just, and so I think like our senses were already pretty heightened, and the fact that something could, that's why I think they didn't like, we were able to pick up on them just because we had been doing this so long. And a person, like, they're really noisy and they make a lot of noise unless they're trying to be quiet and they've practiced. So that sealed my fate for many years. And so during that time, I learned to, survival and to explore and live off the land. And that's when I started just building little forts and being really aggressive in the woods in my stance and stuff, because I didn't want to run into them. I did not want to run into them. But that's also what I came to realize is what I needed to understand better to get over this fear, because I dealt with a lot of PTSD. I was in a 2-7 in the Marine Corps, and we went through some pretty hard times, and one of the biggest things I had to do was just self-discovery, be honest with myself and try to face my fears and insecurities. And the only way to do that was to understand it. And so after years, I realized, I was tired of living in fear of some of the places I love to go most, up in the wilderness. Like I love to go exploring up in the wilderness. And so I realized the only way for me to feel more comfortable was to understand them better. Because, bear and mountain lion, they're dangerous animals. They have the potential to kill you. But we don't fear them because we understand their behaviors. We know what to do when they're around and how to act accordingly to, for the most part, stay alive in encounters with them. But what do you do with something you don't know? Like an apex predator that you have no idea what to do, what it's going to do, or how to react.
Yeah, that's part of the important aspect of actually getting this to be a known critter so that we can actually profile it like every other known critter and have at least some kind of guess what kind of a behavior it's going to exhibit. So, it's like we've said on other shows before, there's grizzly bears. Grizzly bears are really dangerous. There's mountain lions. They're really dangerous. People still camp in areas where they're at because they know enough about the critter to know how to avoid conflict with them for the most part. If you've got some unknown huge predator wandering around, you don't know what the hell it's going to do. You could do the completely wrong thing and end up getting killed because you don't know what you're doing.
Yep. And just those two situations, the one where I went up on that hill and let out that scream, that warning, and then of course when I blocked the egress route and I got intimidating display back at me, those could have turned into violent situations. Like they could have progressed worse. If I had thought like, oh, that's still a person and gone waltzing in there further, I could have gotten hurt, right? Just because if that's not in my frame of reference, that such a creature could exist.
Let me give you another horrible potential doomsday scenario. Suppose that you guys decided that it'd be way cooler to whistle to each other than howling.
I can only imagine.
That could have ended really badly. So, running around the woods howling to each other may sound bad on the face of it, but there's other options that would have been even worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, but anyway, those sealed my fate for years.
I know what it's like, man. It was a few years between when I had my first sighting. It was a couple years before I didn't want to go out in the woods at all for like 4 or 5 years, I think, is about how long it took me wanting to go back out there again. And then it was only with other people, only if we're armed. It took me a long time to get over that. Yeah.
It took me, I think, about 5 years before I was willing to be like, enough is enough of feeling this fear.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what drives a lot of people that have had encounters to become researchers, because they just want to know more about what it is that they saw. And part of it is a fear thing. It's fear of the unknown. And that's one of the most primal, horrible types of fear that humans are subject to. And for good reason, because you're dealing with an unknown quantity. You have no idea what it's going to do next. You have no idea if it's dangerous. You have no idea if, any little thing that you do might set it off. You just don't know because it's an unknown creature.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and at the same point, we're kind of a similar. We're like, I feel like this hominid species in us, we're the apex predators of our own domains. And so when we meet like on face to face, it's definitely like a standoff because they don't know what we're going to do either. Because when I started thinking about it more, I realized, well, if one of these waltzed right out to me and said hi, that'd be too aggressive to me, even if it was trying to be friendly, right? Like that's too much for me to take. And I think that's the equivalent, like if I came in with a bright flashlight and just rushed into the brush trying to look for one. So I feel like they're both, equal in their own regards.
Reminds me of the scenario where they filmed the Pennsylvania white Bigfoot. They heard something out in the woods. He goes running out there with a flashlight and a camera and gets one on camera for them.